And Zach, what are you looking for in the primaries? And of course, in the last presidential year primary in 2008 in North Carolina, there was such activism by young Democrats in North Carolina, led by you, that may or may not return in the general election in the fall. But how can a candidate, a primary candidate, unknown, underfunded, how can she or he excite young voters in the state?
Well, I think one of the things that the president did well is that he's absolutely connected with those voters, and he found people on college campuses that could organize, and so it's much more than just giving a great speech, but letting people know that you care. And so this Generation X or Y wants to absolutely connect and fall in love with what they do. And so if you can connect them to an absolute opportunity to take part and change the world, then you have them. So that's what he was able to bottle. And so I think for any other candidate, making yourself visible on campuses is absolutely, I know Ken did that very well during his candidacy. And I know that if candidates are willing to make those small investments on college campuses, they can reap great rewards on the other side. But for a candidate in 2012, especially the president, I think he has a saving grace. There were so many students that weren't 18 in 2008. And so they couldn't vote. And so if you were between, I think, 14 or 15 and 17, you're chomping at the bit to say that you voted for Barack Obama. And so as we build up, those that were 18 or so will bring that energy back from 2008. And he's added a completely new demographic to the mainstream. And I think he probably has to work with progressives a little bit more to build that relationship or mend that relationship. But for young voters, I really think that he will rely on them again to squeak into the presidency.
And at the same time, the Tea Party will be trying to energize young voters as well. Well, Ruth, with all your years as a member of the media, the mainstream media, and I mean that in the best way, you saw candidate after candidate try to garner press attention. And in our fractured media landscape, it's harder than ever, although candidates have the ability to be their own communications director and be their own publisher. And Ken, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But what do you think candidates should do, particularly for primaries where media attention is so hard to garner, to make an impression on the press and to have their message conveyed in a way that they find helpful?
Well, I think that the rules have all changed. And I think that Barack Obama is a great example of this, where you have to use your own, you have to create your own media energy. And that is this, incredible use of social networking, fundraising with the internet, tweeting, whatever. And
to really to be your own publisher.
I don't anticipate myself choosing somebody to vote for via tweet, but I do think it's a different time. And I think that most young voters in particular don't look to the mainstream media. And so I really do think these years are really game changers in terms of the way people are going to be conveying their message. And it used to be when the News and Observer or the Charlotte Observer endorsed somebody, it meant something. And I'm sorry to say that does not happen anymore.
Having been endorsed by those papers and not prevailed, that hits close to home. And of course, the mainstream media these days, I think, is for many young people, Jon Stewart and Colbert. So,
right, exactly.
Well, Ken Lewis, what were your satisfactions or frustrations as you dealt with the media during the last presidential campaign? Well, actually, the last off-year campaign, 2010.
Well, getting media attention is difficult because there's a lot for the media to cover, and getting above the noise is tough. There are lots of things you can do to gain media attention. I think the best way for a candidate to gain media attention is to connect with voters and to build a groundswell of support for them. I think if you can connect with voters and the media notices that you are a legitimate candidate, that you are resonating with voters, and you have a chance of winning, then I found that brought media attention. So I think the most effective way a candidate in these crowded primaries can really garner the attention they want from the media is to really focus on connecting with voters. And I think I agree with Zach. I think you have to really form a bond with voters. So voters are wanting to feel invested in candidates. And I think here, is another way that Barack Obama has changed the landscape a bit. I think that people got personally invested in a candidate in ways that hadn't happened before. And I think that sets a new expectation of voters for the kind of relationship they want with their candidates. And so I think we're going to see more voters looking for candidates who they feel personally invested in and connected with. I think that's an additional burden for candidates to figure out how to do that.
And they can do it directly. I remember those decades, the 80s and 90s, so long ago, where your connection with the candidate was through the media.
Yeah.
And now it is voter or potential activists directly with the candidate. Well, for all the contractions in the media, the one time where there'll be more members of the media than you could ever imagine will be at the national conventions, including the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. I had one media personality tell me it's like the prom for the press, that every political reporter there's ever been wants to be covering the Democratic or Republican National Convention. And so I want to talk about that as the third of kind of the four pivotal moments in the near-term future. And let's look back, though, because I think it's instructive to the last Democrat National Convention, since that's what we'll have in North Carolina. 2008 in Denver, Colorado. I know, Ken, you were there. Were you there, Zach?
Oh, no.
Okay, so we'll get Ken's comments on that. But from a political perspective first, Tom, what impact will it have, positive or negative, for Democratic candidates in North Carolina that the Democratic National Convention is in North Carolina, based on what you saw happen to Democrats in 2008 in Colorado?
It's really not going to have any effect at all on what happens here in November. We did a poll right after the convention in Denver of Colorado voters, and we said, did having the convention in your state make you more likely to vote for Barack Obama, less likely, no difference? 85% said no difference, 6% said more likely, 9% said less likely. That's all within the margin of error. It didn't hurt Obama by any means to have it in Colorado, but it just didn't make a big difference. But I think that there's a broader symbolism to the convention being here, even if it's not going to shift any votes in November. In September of 2004, early September of 2004, John Kerry pulled all of his efforts out of our state at the beginning of September. Now, 8 years later, the eyes of the nation are going to be on North Carolina at the beginning of September. So it's really symbolic of our metamorphosis very quickly into very much a swing state that I think Barack Obama's made possible.
And my presumption for why it was a wash in Colorado may be the same in North Carolina in terms of Democrats' political prospects is that you certainly energize your base. And that can offset however many swing voters you might turn off by bringing in the full spectrum of your party. And this would be true if it was the Republicans as well. That is, no state is, the interests, particularly swing voters in the state, is not going to match the political leadership of one of our two national parties, so that you're going to have left coast liberals who probably would not be elected in North Carolina, but they will be to some extent the face of the party in the state. But at the same time, you're going to have a lot of young people in North Carolina, a lot of others just energized, given all the attention in our state. What's your sense, having been in Denver, of what having a national convention can mean to a state, and particularly you're out there with your daughter, what it meant to her?
Well, I was resonating with Zach's point again about these young voters. My daughter turns 18 tomorrow. So she couldn't vote in 2008, but she was very involved. And Zach's exactly right. She's chomping at the bit to vote in this election. I think there are lots of young people who are feeling the same way. I think that the convention is going to be a boom for North Carolina. I mean, I think that having
broadly defined, putting aside
beyond politics. I think economically it will be a boom with all of the people who will come to the state and spend money. I think the exposure that our state will get from people who might not have visited here to learn about our state. I hope some of them will go to Asheville, or some of them will go to the coast. So I think economically it will make a big difference for our state. I tend to agree that politically it's probably going to be a wash. But I think economically it's going to be a real boom for the state.
Well, I predicted a year in advance of Charlotte being picked that it was going to be picked. One, because the Republicans had chosen Tampa, Florida, and I knew all the networks would just want to load up their trucks and come up I-95. But above all, I knew that the First Lady loves Asheville.
Yep.
And so you can see it'll play out that they're going to fly to Asheville, I would predict, in the days before the convention and then take the short hop down to Charlotte. Well, we have drawn near the end of our time in the kitchen, and I know we're going to have plenty of time to talk about what's going to happen in November 2012, but let's just get a few things on the kitchen table real quick. Tom, what do you think is most likely to happen in the November elections? Do you think Barack Obama can win North Carolina again? Do you think that Beverly Perdue is in a position where she still has a chance? Do you think the Democrats can take back control of the General Assembly? What are the keys that you think are most likely to happen?
The number one key is North Carolina is going to be the most important in the presidential race than it's maybe been ever. In 2008, North Carolina was the icing on the cake for Barack Obama. It was nice that he won it. He certainly didn't need it to win the election. His numbers are down a lot nationally, but they're not as far down in North Carolina. And what that means is that next year, North Carolina might be part of the path to 270. It might actually be a state he needs to win. North Carolina and Virginia, to me right now, two most important states in the presidential race, because Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, those are fading away.
Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana he can totally forget about. But these states with highly educated, large black populations, lots of college students, he's holding up better in those kinds of places. So that means, as much of a circus as it was in 2008 here, it may be even more. Governor Perdue, we only had one governor who was down by as much as her in our polling in 2009, who went on to be reelected in 2010 in all the polling that we do across the country. So
was that Illinois?
He was never down by 10. Jan Brewer, the governor of Arizona, was down by 10, and then she declared war on illegal immigrants, and that saved her political career. It's a little cynical, but so the odds very much stacked against Governor Perdue, but not completely impossible. But,
particularly given Obama's competitiveness here.
Yeah. But the weird dichotomy with Perdue's unpopularity is that right now voters are saying they're leaning a little bit towards voting Democratic for the General Assembly because they're so unhappy with the new Republican legislature. So we could have, and this is true at both the national level and the state level, we could see Democrats take back the U.S. House and Obama lose. We could see Democrats take back the North Carolina legislature and Perdue lose. If either of those things happen, it's pretty much completely unprecedented in political history. If we've seen one thing the last 5 or 6 years, though, it's to expect the unexpected. We're in a very strange political time.
Ken, a thought on November 2012?
Well, I agree that we're in a volatile political time now. I think 2012 is going to be determined by turnout. It's going to be a turnout game. Who can get their people out? And I think at this point it's hard to know who will have that advantage in 2012. But I think it's going to be a turnout game.
Zach, will the youth of North Carolina turn out again?
I think they will. I absolutely think that young people will come out again for the points that we discussed. And also, to Tom's point, the Republicans have overplayed their hand, both nationally and locally. And so that's just going to pave the way for Perdue to be reelected slightly and for President Obama to win the presidency again.
Ruth Sheen, you always got the last word in your columns. We give you the last word here in the kitchen. What are your thoughts?
I hope you all are right. I tend to take a little more pessimistic view, especially of what's going to happen with the General Assembly. And I don't think we're going to have a Democratic-led General Assembly for a while, which is a shame, but that is my assessment. I think we are going to see some interesting Republican primaries where we're going to have coffee party Republicans taking on the Tea Party Republicans, and some other people taking on the sort of Republican establishment you mentioned and trying to push them further to the right. So I think there's it's going to be an interesting time, but I'm not as optimistic, unfortunately.
Well, no matter what happens, and at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen, it'll make for interesting conversation, as this has been. I want to thank you all for joining me on Kitchen Politics. Tom Jensen, thanks for being our newcomer to this. Ken Lewis, thanks for coming back. Zach Hawkins, same to you. And of course, Ruth Sheehan, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Hampton Dellinger. Thank you all for joining us on Kitchen Politics.